Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for this opportunity to address you with some thoughts and remarks in the eve of the big anniversary we are celebrating. Of course, here in Berlin, but actually a big anniversary for all cities all around the world and actually for the whole civilization. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief, it was the epoch of incredulity. It was the season of light, it was the season of darkness, it was the spring of hope, it was the winter of despair. These words by Charles Dickens have rarely seemed so topical. Throughout history, humans have encountered moments where the decision about which side of the history you must be comes to question. We have lived through great moments of leadership and brave failures, only to return to these same questions later without a mutual understanding of the course of our common path. It would be easy then to question all we have learned and argue that our times are more special than any time before us. However, I, as a person who has dedicated my life to public service, would like to make the case for development, not stagnation. 30 years ago, a divide shattered as the Berlin Wall fell. It had divided not only a city, but a country and the world in a physical manifestation of mental dreadlock. People were ready for change. Time had run out on the old ways of governing. Technological advances, freedom of speech, and modern values finally took over the wall that had been a constant reminder that nations are not the ones dictating the course of history, but people are. Even though the events that had led to the final fall of the wall seem specific, the momentum had been felt for long. In his recent Times article, former Soviet President Mikhail Gorbachev reminiscences attending the festivities in East Berlin, marking the 40th anniversary of the German Democratic Republic in 1989, feeling the overwhelming discontent of the people. Inherently, an urban sentiment concretized by a wall, the discontent of the East Berliners epitomized the feeling of belonging to a community that had overgrown its role as a puppet of the nation-state's politics. Even though a complex nation-state-led diplomatic process eventually delivered peace and unification, the process of coming together had started in the streets of Berlin, where people were trying to envision what good life would mean for newly unified community. The peace made in the streets and communities was practical, although not easy. Life must go on, and for the better. The divide of Berlin was the divide of two worlds by politics, but the fall of the Berlin Wall unified much more than a city. It gave rise to the idea of a city as a community rather than a place. It also gave birth for the growth of a much larger community of the European Union. At the end of the Cold War, countries and cities from the global south to the north experienced the economic, cultural, and social aftermath of one of the greatest transformations of our time. Empowered by example, countries were able to take bold steps forward. Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia found a new political footing and made a move towards independence. In Finland, my country, the end of the Cold War paved the way for our subsequent European Union membership and a highlighted role on the world's political stage. For decades after, we have been resolute that Western democracy had proven its vitality and superiority over all other systems, and it was only a matter of time before it would be adopted everywhere. Now we know that what we believe to be a well-functioning democratic model has not successfully spread outside its traditional territory, and instead it has been strongly questioned even in its original roots. What we saw as a conclusion 30 years ago was only the beginning of a new era. We have come to understand that the world will never be complete. We must grow used to the constant transformations and the insecurities of our time. A right model might not exist, only what we make of it at any given time. As writer Nate Silver described brilliantly in his book, The Signal and the Noise, we often fail to distinguish the signal, or true and relevant information, from the confusing noise that blurs it. Things considered permanent, such as communism, may disappear surprisingly quickly. This is relevant when we think of the future of democracy and liberalism. They are no laws of nature. We cannot and should not take them for granted either. In many places of the world, cities have become the leaders of modern democratic values. Where nation states fail to act on climate change, segregation, or migration, cities step up and take the lead. As communities of people, cities are many times better equipped to manage rapid response. We are close to the people, pragmatic, action-oriented, and used to dealing with everyday life challenges. Cities are also less politically oriented as nation states. As the former New York City Mayor LaGuardia used to say, there is no Republican or democratic ways of cleaning the streets. Leaders from all around the world recognize that people are growing impatient. Our governance structure must be developed in order to accommodate the growing demand for participation. A change of political regime does not help if the root causes for unfunctional democracy lie at the core of our governance system. At the same time, corporations, NGOs, and civil society take a larger role in shaping our societies. The way we live, move, work, and travel is less and less controlled by the tools of nation states and increasingly in the hands of the wider ecosystem. We can try to limit or stop this change, but a more meaningful way forward would be to shape our governance to meet the people halfway. The wars of today take many shapes and forms. We see regimes limit their people physically, mentally, and culturally. We witness a time where access to information and knowledge is becoming a new weapon and data the new oil. We try to provide our people with the necessary tools to equip and even master these new shifting circumstances, but many are left behind. The divide between realities is our current wall. Whole world is now much like Berlin, growing impatient and searching for a new direction. Cities account for 80% of the global GDP and more than half of the world's population. The Greek philosopher Aristoteles said over 2,000 years ago that people move into cities in order to find a job and earn their living, but they stay there in order to live a good life. Cities, much like nation states before them, collaborate on international scale, provide solutions for the most pressing global challenges of today, and create a framework for innovation and creativity that take humanity forward. Cities are the new powerhouses of the world. I believe that some of this development started in Berlin 30 years ago. With this new established power comes also great responsibility. In many corners of the world, the growing importance of cities and their role in defending Western democracy has been recognized but not supported. Cities with no armies, weapons, or treaties must resort to softer tools in their battles. In the end, communities are built by people, for the people, managed by the people. Where politics fail, we must replace force with productive action. In the words of the late President Kennedy, let us not seek the Republican answer or the democratic answer, but the right answer. Let us not seek to fix the blame for the past. Let us accept our own responsibility for the future. I'm inherently an optimist. I believe that technological advances will help us create solutions that make the future better. I believe that cities' newfound power and the international collaboration will provide a platform for the fast response expected by people. And I believe that, at least in some cases, the collaboration between nation states and cities will provide a model for a more comprehensive governance model. Western democracy will prevail if it's desirable enough. It will not prevail by force. We have built it. We have the ability to develop it in the way that will provide a more comprehensive and sustainable model. In the end, it's not a question about right or wrong, but what will provide us with the solutions we need in order to preserve life on Earth. 30 years ago, Berlin became a symbol for a powerful movement for freedom of speech, equality, democracy, and modern leadership. Today, we need those symbols to once again prove that governance is built for people, not vice versa. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You can stay there for a moment. We would be happy to take questions and comments as always. You can raise your hand and then briefly introduce yourself when posing a question or making a comment. Who would like to go first? Then let me maybe ask a question of my own. I was talking to your assistant about this also a few weeks ago. One of our board members, who's actually unfortunately no longer with us, Benjamin Barber, wrote a book, Mayors Should Rule the World. And he was reflecting on the changing up. I was just referring to a book one of our board members, who is actually now deceased, wrote, Benjamin Barber, called Mayors Should Rule the World. And his main point is that the national borders are actually decreasing in importance in today's interdependent world, and the role and accountability of mayors is actually increasing. In the sense, you don't have a choice. You have to make sure that the system works, whether it's fire department, roads, schools. That accountability is very close, the connection between you and your city, you and your people. Very often, however, when it comes to heads of state, as we know, in different parts of the world, different countries, that's not the case. So my question for you in the framework of the fall of the wall 30 years ago here, do you think Benjamin Barber has a point there? Or where do you see the role of you as a mayor, and actually mayors in general, in this interdependent context framework, where it does seem, at least in certain degrees, the national borders are decreasing slightly in importance?
Yeah. Actually, the correct title of the book of Benjamin Barber was If the Mayors Rule the World. And now I happen to know, which is not a secret, that the former Chicago mayor, Emanuel Röhm, is publishing a book early next year when it's, and the topic will be Why the Mayors Are Ruling the World. And that is something no one of us has read yet. But I think that they both really have a point, and for several reasons. The first one is, of course, the urbanization itself. I mean, already today it's more than 50% of the world's population living in cities. In Europe, roughly 70%. And of course, wherever you see people moving to some direction, it also somehow affects the power balances. But I think what is even more important is that it's not only that people move into cities and that more people are living in cities, but more people having an urban mindset, an urban reality, and actually that everything in the world is more connected to cities and urban realities. So you could say that most of the biggest opportunities in the world will be in cities, but also most of the biggest problems will be in cities in the future. So I mean, urbanization itself, of course, has an effect. Then another point is that we've also seen that many of the globally pressing problems are actually issues where many member states have been, not member states, but states, nation states, have become either like incapable or even unwilling to solve them. I think that the best example, best well-known example is when the President Trump withdraw US from the Paris Accord. What happened was that the very next day, I think it was 70 American mayors who declared that President Trump may do whatever he will, but our cities stay committed to tackle the climate change. And it was not a surprise that they disagreed with their president, but that was maybe news for the world, that the truth that cities stayed there committed actually played a big difference and a big role. And that's why it was maybe not that dramatic, actually, what the American president did, even if, of course, from a symbolic value, it was a big issue. Then you could also say, and that is also a proof of the fact that in several cases, the toolkit cities have is actually more relevant than the tool cities than nation states have, for example, in tackling climate change. If I take my country, the three biggest issues are energy production, energy efficiency of buildings, and transportation. And in all of those, actually cities are, in most cases around the world, as relevant players and nation states. Then, as I mentioned here, I think one of the strengths of cities is that they are less political by nature. So, I mean, as said, there is not Republican or democratic way to clean the streets, which actually means that more of the energy in city administrations is used to do things, not battling and fighting your political partners. The cities are also like much more operative by nature. I mean, we take each and every day, we take care of the streets and the kids in the schools and so on. So I mean, really solving the problems people have, even either in their everyday life or then on the global level, I think it's a more and more question of pragmatic, practical issues. And then my last point here, which I think will gain a lot of importance in the future, is that cities have, by definition, by nature, a much closer contact and dialogue with the people than states ever can have. And I'm sure that, especially in like empowered Western democracies, that is something which will gain more and more importance in the future. And I mean, of course, you can elect and choose bad mayors as well, but I mean, in any case, they have a much better possibility to create a real contact with the people and like building inclusive societies.
Thank you. And let me maybe abuse my situation as moderator and ask a second question. I'm using the chance since our students actually are doing the job. I'll ask a question on their behalf. I asked you the first question regarding this banner, the fall of the wall. Now I want to ask you a question regarding the second banner in terms of cultural diplomacy. Traditionally, cultural diplomacy was thought of as something practiced between one country and another country. Goethe Institute, British Council, Alliance Française. Very often I get posed the question in the classroom from the students, Mark, is there a role for cultural diplomacy within a city? Does it have to be country to country? Or is there also opportunities and needs within a city framework for cultural diplomacy? And in that regards, I would use my second definition for cultural diplomacy, that cultural diplomacy is how do we actually educate, enhance, and sustain relationships of any sort, locally or nationally, with the goal of forming dialogue, understanding, and trust. So I know you're not coming from the field per se of cultural diplomacy, but as the mayor of Helsinki, what benefit or need do you see for cultural diplomacy within a city such as Helsinki? Or is there a need for cultural diplomacy?
I strongly believe that we're witnessing an era of a growing importance and role of cities. In practical terms, that means several things, and one which I have noticed clearly is that during these very few last years, cities are networking and partnering with other cities around the world in a way you have never ever seen before. And a little bit in the same way the nation states actually did 100 years ago. So I have seen a dramatic change in the diplomatic relations of the city of Helsinki during the last 2 years. So we have all the time strengthening cooperation with other Nordic capitals, big cities like Beijing and New York, City of London, and then we are a member of several networks of like cities of same kind of mindsets. It's something. I mean, some networks work on data, some other ones work on on smart cities, some on sustainable development, but there are also platforms and networks around like cultural issues. And I'm sure, yeah, of course, I mean, the ultimate goal for a city is for a good life. And there, I mean, of course, culture and cultural issues play a big role, and that is also a big part of the cooperation we are having with other cities. I don't know how you actually define cultural diplomacy, but I know that when I meet my mayoral colleagues all around the world, cultural issues play a bigger and bigger role all the time.